Hey, this is Ariel, and we're about to get started with my recent conversation with Scott Snyder. I'm overall very proud of the way that the conversation went and all of the insights that he lent to us. But I did want to say before we get going with it that there is one moment in there that I'm not proud of, where I made an all too casual reference to anxiety disorders. And I do try to explain it and re-clarify after the comment. But just in advance, I wanted to say I didn't want it to come off that way. I do actually have an anxiety disorder myself. It used to be much worse than it is now. And that's sort of where I was coming from, because I basically just say that if I were growing up in the current social media climate, then I would have an anxiety disorder. But what I really should have said was that my anxiety would be much worse than it is now, because it's gone down significantly from its peak in my teens. And that's where I'm coming from. All right. So I just didn't want to offend anybody. And I'm sorry that it did come off very insensitive. That's all. So let's go. Scott Snyder conversation. It was the first real audio conversation that I ever had with a pro. And can you imagine? I was so nervous speaking to someone like him without really any experience. But I hope that you do enjoy it, and thank you for listening.
I will admit I have not done a lot of interviews, so please bear with me.
Oh, sure. No, I just appreciate you took so much time looking at Black Mirror and everything. I really, anyone with that kind of passion for comics and for anything that I've been involved in, we're really, really grateful for. So thank you.
It's such a wonderful story. And I think one of my favorite Batman stories in general, not least because it's different for having Dick in the role instead of Bruce and dealing with these new characters, and James Jr. in particular, who is really fascinating to me as a person who is interested in psychology and psychopathy and things like that. So, like, what is it that gave you the idea to create this psychopath character?
It was right around the time that, for me, I felt like I was like hired onto Batman to Detective Comics when I was like super ill prepared for it in my mind. Like, what happened was I got American Vampire through, and I was like over the moon that I finally had my dream job writing my own comics. And they asked me if there was anything I'd like to do at superheroes, and I was like, sure. You know, I'm a huge fan of many characters. My favorite is Batman, but anything. And eventually, it was really short. It was like within a couple of weeks, they asked me if I'd be interested in doing the backups on Detective, and Paul Dini was writing the features. And I was like, oh my God, I am not nowhere near good enough to do that. But if I say no, they'll never give me another chance. And so I said yes. And then Paul left to do other work, and they asked me if I wanted the whole thing. And I have no idea to this day why they trusted me with that when I was so brand new. I think it was mostly because Grant Morrison was doing Batman, and Tony Daniel was he was on Batman Inc. and Tony was on Batman. So there was a sense of maybe nobody was looking at Detective. But anyway, so my only compass for that was to just try and make something really, really personal, and just imagine it was fan fiction, and forget that anyone was reading it, and approach the artist that I thought would be really right for that kind of story. And what was happening in my life at that time was we had a very young son. You know, he was only 2. Now he's like, 13, 14. But I was really terrified as a father. I was terrified that, I had just stepped into the role of writing comics, my dream job. And suddenly I was like foisted into my absolute favorite character, who I knew I was like, it's like, playing single A baseball. And then suddenly they're like, hey kid, you want to pitch in the World Series? And
Seriously.
Yeah, you're going to screw it up. So I wanted to write a story that was all about that feeling, about suddenly being in a position where you can do the thing you've always wanted to do in one way, but everything feels like it's terrifying. Everything familiar is changing to challenge you in a way. And Gotham to me has always been that. It was always this idea of a city that was really just the best antagonist in literature, where it wasn't evil. It would just produce your absolute biggest fear so that you could face that fear and then either come out the other side stronger or succumb to it and become a great villain. And so I wanted to present that thesis and imbue it with like a real sense of where I was at that moment in my life. And Dick Grayson was so easy for that because he's such an emotive and empathetic character where I was terrified of writing Bruce at the time. Bruce never tells you how he feels. It's always Alfred being like, "Are you sure you don't feel this way, sir?" Leave me alone.
You can't get him to talk.
Right. And then you know that's how he feels because Alfred said it. But with Dick, it was great because he was terrified and excited to be Batman, and I was terrified and excited to write Batman. And so what I wanted to do is make it so that Gotham was changing to face him in this young, wild, different way. And I felt the best antagonist for him ultimately would be his reflection, so if he's a child of Gotham who great strength is his empathy and his compassion and his social investment in other people, the family and friends and the people of the city, he's much more in tune with all that than Bruce. Then the villain should be someone who's a child of Gotham and has no empathy and is sociopathic in a way that has confounded everyone because he's so good at pretending in some ways to have changed, and also he's playing with the people's feelings who are so close to Dick in that way. And so the idea for him came from this kind of, how do I make a reflection to Gordon? How do I make a case that's a black mirror to him, where someone who's this great detective, second to Batman only really in Gotham, how could I make a villain who would confound him because he's so close to the character that he can't see him clearly anymore? He can't see if it's right or wrong. And the guy's playing him like a fiddle. So that's where he came from, and DC at first was really not into the idea of using him because A, they were like, they had forgotten the character existed. And then B, they were kind of opposed to having Jim Gordon have a son that was that dark. But I was reminding them that I thought the story that, the stories that my favorite, at least in Gotham, always pit characters again. It's not, they pit characters against their absolute worst nightmares. And for him, that would be a nightmare. He has a great daughter. He has like this terrific kid who's a grown up now. But I mean, having a brother involved who's in continuity. I mean, he was there and they're still using that. So I was like, let me do it. And so finally, Dan DiDio came around and was like, all right, you know what, go for it. And they just left me alone. I mean, I really think it was because Grant, I genuinely believe it was just because Grant was doing Batman Inc. And that was the real big flagship monster hit. And Tony was a behemoth on Batman at that time too. So I was kind of like, nobody's paying attention to this kid over here.
They left you to devices.
Yeah, they really did. I really lucked out with that. So that's kind of where he came from and where that story came from.
So what made you decide to use Jim Gordon as basically like a Deuteronomist? Because I would say that he's not even a secondary character. He's just a secondary protagonist, basically. Yeah. So what gave you that idea, and like what logic went into doing that? I don't know that that's really been done before much.
Well,
just elevating him to that level.
The idea really was, the story began as a backup, like I said. And so initially it was going to be a Jim Gordon story. That's where I started playing around with the idea of James. And then when it opened up and became the feature, I knew that what I wanted to do was something different than what I had seen, in that I wanted the feature and the backup to play with each other and intertwine, and to use only two artists on the whole thing. And if they were willing to do it, and then have it really come together in the end, where the backup had been slowly creeping into the feature in ways that they realized. So that architecture was kind of built into my pitch. And I can't say enough good things about Jock and Francesca, who both become two of my best friends. And I'm visiting Jock in November. It's the first big trip we're taking as a family. We're going to go see his family. My son plays with his daughter online, all this stuff. So we go. Yeah. But they were the first big stars that really took a chance on me, when I was no one. And I remember meeting Jock. I paid my own way to San Diego that year in 2009 just to meet him. I'd never met him. And I wrote him beforehand and was like, listen, I'm the new writer on Detective. I have this story. I know you're a big star, but I know I'm nobody, but can I just pitch the story to you? And he was great. He took me out to a bar and I told him the whole story and he was like, you know what? I like you and I'll do it. I'll do 12 issues, you know? And I was like, you're the guy. I love you. Thank you, you know? And so Mike Martz at the time, who was the editor, I think he really didn't think that I'd be able to convince Jock to do it because he had another artist lined up for the book who I love, Mark Bagley Jr. from Ultimate Spider-Man fame. But it wouldn't have been a good fit for that story.
Yeah.
So I still look back and I can't believe I was I can't believe I was that nuts that I'd be like, can I ask Jock, who's this big star, to do this book instead of this other big star? And also ask this other guy who Francesco Francavilla to come in and do this, who's not done. And that they were just like, you know what, just to their credit, they were
do it
like, go away and do what you want. So it was, that was it.
Yeah, it was such a beautiful, I think, creative chemistry that came out in that particular collaboration.
What's great about them is they really taught me a lot also about comics as I was going, and exactly what you're saying. Like, I mean, I learned it most from Greg on Court of Owls, really, really in a giant way. But I learned from them what it means to be a team when you're sticking up for things to editorial, and how if you all band together and you really are on the same side, you can get things through you might not have otherwise. And also just how much everything depends on each other. You know, people always think like, well, if you're writing a script and that's your job, but you're writing a script that the artist has to do, the colorist has to do, the inker has to do, then the letterer is doing, then your editor, and it's a whole team effort. And if you're not considerate of that, which, you know, I was just learning that stuff then, you know, you mess the whole thing up for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So so many lessons from that book. But yeah, I love those guys to death. They're great.
Yeah. Especially I thought Francesco Francavilla, his work, the way that the colors work with his, like, sort of more like I don't want to say simple, but it is kind of simple, his art style, right? And then the really stylized colors, it just makes for this beautiful sort of almost color noir sort of feel. Yeah. That really was fantastic.
Really.
Jock is and Jock is amazing every time he does anything. So
yeah, they both
pretty much.
I could have written the phone book and it would have been okay at some point. They were great.
I don't know about that, but
they were great partners.
Did you actually get to do? Because I remember at the time there was an interview, and I read a lot of interviews, that you said that you had a lot of plans for James. Did you actually get to do all of those plans? Because I know that DC kind of like goes in different directions. Yeah.
No, I had a whole second year plan where Dick was going to be Batman and James Jr. was in prison and he was going to start talking to him like a Hannibal Lecter character as solving different cases. And it was going to bring Barbara and Dick first apart and then together. And I had this whole big plan of how to kind of bring the Bat family more into the universe in different ways. But I was right. I maybe like a couple issues from finishing that story when they told me they were bringing Bruce back and, you know, asked me to try and write Bruce. And I was so terrified and excited that all those ideas kind of vanished pretty quick. But
yeah,
no, I would have loved to use him more. I think, you know what it is, Ariel, was like at that time, I was so sure that I was going to get fired. I mean, I was so positive that it was like a mistake. That I had snuck in, and I was doing these things, and I was sure it would be like you get one 12-issue story, you know, maybe if you're lucky, and then you're out. And so I almost didn't think too much about how to continue anything. It was more like, if they give me another chance, I'll do this. If they don't, fine. But if they move me over here, I have this. And it was never about like creating a run. I always thought it was like one story and out. So it was always like, how do I just swing for the fence, hope I can do this one story? And then you can even see it like until the end of Death of the Family, because I ended that like I didn't have a second story, but I had a second story in my head. And Dan and Jim were just like, relax, like no one's kicking you off the book, like just chill out. And so finally I was kind of like, all right. And so it was around the end of Death of the Family where I started to leave things in where I was like, if I can come back to this, then. So before that, it was like that. And I think that's part of why I wish I had gone back to things like James Jr. I wish I had gone back to Court of Owls. I wish I had other stories for all those things. But on the other hand, I'm really glad that I sort of just tried new things each time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's funny because James and I, James is like my best friend, or at least, I mean, Greg is, he's one of my absolute best friends in the world, James Tynan. I talk to him like every day. And his approach to Batman is so different than mine because it's also a different environment. At that time, it was monthly and it was like, it had different pressures, but he builds over time and builds out like this big symphonic kind of soap opera. That's, I was more like 6 issues, 12 issues, and they're going to fire me. So that's it. You get one. It's like I was telling movies. I was like movies, and James is like a long running soap opera.
Yeah. Did that actually change when you started, like when you were doing Justice League and such? Did you know that you were basically going to be there for a certain amount of time? You're starting to build things long term, kind of getting comfortable.
Yeah, that was the time. That was the goal of that book. Was I said to Dan and them, if I do this, then I need like 40 issues, and I want to do something expansive and cumulative that builds to something, and then I'll do death metal at the end of it if you let me build to it. And so they agreed. So that was a real like long-term plan. I still have all the photos of the whiteboards to prove it, which was really funny to look back because so much changed. I mean, it's been a really hard few years watching the changes of that company for many reasons. Like sometimes just good people I really love were fired, and other times there were changes that forced stories in all kinds of different directions. Sometimes for human error, sometimes just circumstantially, sometimes. But it was so volatile between 2016, 2017. 2018 through now. There's stability there. I thought we were just getting back to stability now, and then the AT&T news, just broke. Where So I don't know what it means. I don't think anyone does right now. But that period was so like just no one knew if the ground was where it was, and so. To no one's, and I'm not throwing anyone under a bus. I'm just saying everybody there in administrative and big positions, I think, was trying to figure out what the future looked like. And so when you're building a 3-year story or 3-year story that's then going to end in an event, it's like flying a plane through like lightning storm after lightning storm, because you're like, everything's coming at you, and they're like, just end the story here, do an event like that. And you're like, no, we said we'd do this. I need to get there. Mm-hmm. And luckily, everyone was kind enough to let us do it the way they had promised. But there was a lot of like, stretching a small arc into Year of the Villain, and everything we did, I'm proud of and I liked. It was just more a matter of like, okay, instead of 1 month, you have 4 months now to do this. Okay, instead of 5 months, you have 1 month to do this. And it was just like, that's comics, It just. Mm-hmm. Of everybody, I felt worse for the editors, because I felt like under the kind of really dire or just really erratic environment because of so many corporate changes, where there, AT&T coming in and distribution changes, COVID, everything. It was just like nobody could get their feet under them a lot of the time, and it was nobody's fault. I mean, or I'm not blaming anyone. I'm sure there are people at fault. I just mean that I'm just speaking to the idea. The experience of it was just difficult all around. And I think all of us are trying to make something. I'm saying, because it's a long answer to your question, but Justice League was the time where I was like, I'm going to come in and do 3 years, and then 2 to 3 years, and then do a big event at the end. And I picked like the absolute worst time to try and do that. Not because they didn't let me. Ultimately, I got the story that, pretty much as I wanted, but it was more like, my God, it was like driving off-road the whole time, where you're like, I have to.
Last year was crazy. Last year was crazy. And you could see the changes happening behind the scenes. I mean, like, obviously, I don't know what they were, but just watching the solicits come by and the news announcements and press releases, everything changing month to month.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I think the thing that sometimes, people armchair quarterback it or speculate a lot about, like, well, why did this happen or what's going to happen? Or, I think the thing people forget is just sometimes that all that is being experienced by staff that are there only because nobody, no one editing comics is making a lot of money editing comics. I mean, it's not like no one, you know what I'm saying? Like none of this young, passionate editorial staff, older, passionate editorial staff, they're there because they love the medium and they're trying to make good books, and all this crazy stuff is happening right and left. And that's the experience internally. So when when people on the outside are like, what do you think this means? You're like, or, is this because of this or that? And you're like, hey, literally you're asking me like, what's causing the waves while I'm on a boat with people trying to just steer it so it doesn't sink, and that's it. Like, just let us get to land and then we can talk about it. And that,
yeah.
And so, yeah, it's been a crazy time. I mean, there's been a lot of upsides, like as well, not to the terrible things in the world like COVID, but I mean, I think some of the stress on the market, which again, I would never say was a good thing in any way. But on the other side now, I mean, I think there's some good things in terms of the measures people are taking and the kinds of emphasis they're putting on certain aspects of comics. And I think there really is a passion and a mission behind the way DC is operating, about really wanting to elevate new voices, really wanting to give some good meat and potatoes stories, making sure digital is like for new voices as well. They're trying to find a lane for each thing in a way that's going to work for that, So,
and trying lots of different new things, as not just rehashing the same stories and doing predictable things. A lot of the predictable things, I love them anyway. I love comics. Comics do go cyclical a lot of the time, but sometimes it's also nice to just shake it all up and do something completely out of left field.
I mean, as long as the people working on the books, and this has always been the case when I've been at DC, I've never seen any crazy changes made by people who didn't love the characters and were trying to do something that would progress them in a way and wasn't. I mean, I can think of a couple examples where I was like, I wouldn't do that, but I mean, there's not what I hope fans recognize is it's very rare that someone's coming along to try and upset you and break your character. They're trying to upset you maybe, but because they love the story they're going to get to on the other side. I started on that, killing Bruce. And I mean, everything we did was sort of controversial at the time, even though now it's more like, seems really harmless. But, making James Jr., I got some heavy criticism. This is the early days of Twitter, so it's not like now. This is like back in this is 2010. So you're talking about like social media was different then. There were people that were very angry at me for making him that dark, giving him a son that was a psychopath, and then also for introducing a brother to Bruce Wayne. They were very angry about that. Then I got people very angry about the Joker's face being cut off, and then super angry about doing the origin over again, and then crazy angry about killing Bruce and having James Gordon step into that role, Jim Gordon. And I mean, I but I always said the same thing, which was, look, this is my favorite character in the world. The whole point of trying these things is because I can see the story I want to get to, and it says something new, but true to core about the character that I think is important in these moments. I was always trying to write the character for something my kids would eventually pick up and see was in conversation with the moment, in conversation with the things I was anxious about or hopeful about in my life or the world or in their lives. And even if it's buried in comic book lunacy, like Metal is like the bonkersest thing ever.
Oh, it was so good though.
Well, like Last Night on Earth, Last Night on Earth is like that story is really personal. I wrote, and Zero Year I wrote for my kids, but like they're all personal, but Last Night on Earth is about the world. It's about Batman finally almost being broken by the idea that he allowed people in, the people they've always protected and to help, and they tore him apart and tore everything apart, the Hall, and that they voted against Superman and the heroes to put their villains in power. And that, without getting too topical, I don't think that's hard to read in terms of what the last number of years has been like as a parent.
Yeah.
You know, in that way, and the anger and the fear and the frustration and all that stuff that a lot of us, I think, felt at watching things get so dark. So that was always the way. You know, it's always like, they're like, you're putting Joker's head in a jar and what? And I'm like, there's the point. Like, I'm trying to say, get somewhere. I promise.
It's going somewhere. Yeah. I think, like, for me, being on Twitter can get really exhausting because I do notice that a lot of people will treat the latest issue as though it's the way that things are going to be forever. So if somebody dies, you're never going to see that character again. Or if, you know, a character makes a bad decision, that's ruined the character forever. But I think that you have to kind of have faith that the writers and the editors, everybody, they're not trying to destroy your favorite character. You know, they're trying to go, it's a storyline, and storylines, you go through ups and downs. That's part of the point of a storyline, because, you know, otherwise nothing would be happening. And nobody wants that either.
I send this thing to my friends sometimes. It's a letter written to the editor about Batman Year One. And it's like, Dear DC Comics, I want you to know I'm dropping Batman Forever because this is a piece of trash. Like, it's way too, Batman would never do these things. And this is it. I'm never reading it again. And I love it just because, you know, not because to make fun of the person that wrote it, but because, you know, you got to love the passion that comic fans bring to these characters, and they love them the way you do. And plenty of them know them better than I do, know Batman better than I do. You know, it's just that this is my version. Like, everybody that takes the character, it's their version. It's not the same person. Like, Grant's Batman is not my Batman. It's not Tom's Batman. It's not James's Batman. It's not Mariko's Batman. It just isn't. It just doesn't work that way. Like, it's built. Your Grant gave me the best advice when I started on Detective, and I was so terrified. And he's like, when you write Batman, you create a birth and a death for your version. Like, meaning you retell the origin in your mind, and you tell the last story, the Dark Knight Returns of your version, and then do it, because then you feel like you own the whole character, and that's it. And that's how you get over your fears about writing them. Nobody knows them better than you, because you just made them up. That's it.
That's a great advice.
Right? It was great. I remember exactly where I was in San Diego. I bumped into him in San Diego at the buffet, and he gave me that advice because he saw I was like having panic attacks. He was great. He's always been so kind to me. But
it's like, I have this vision of Grant Morrison just sort of throwing gems of wisdom out there, because you're not the first person. When I'm listening to interviews, I think one of them with Josh Williamson, he also mentioned that when he ran into Grant Morrison, he got all these insights thrown at him about Barry Allen and Bruce. So,
he's that way. Yeah, Grant thinks more deeply about these characters than anyone I know. And he's also really funny and kind and like totally down to earth in many ways as well. And very approachable. And I can't say enough good things about that guy. He's like a hero off the page in terms of how he treats up and coming creators, at least in my experience. He was so generous to me on my way up. Always has been. And I'll always be grateful to him for that. Yeah, I think, you know, I agree with you about Twitter. I've been really removing myself more and more from it since the pandemic. And, you know, there's so much to focus on, having the kids home and keeping my family safe. And our little guy, we had a baby a couple of years ago, and then he just turned 2, and he had a cranial problem where his skull fused really early. And so he had to have this big craniotomy where they took his skull apart and all this when he was 6 months old.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, it was rough. You know, I mean, I just felt you feel so helpless, but because he was on a ventilator and that stuff, when he was, you know, they were operating, back when COVID was starting and there was all the worry about it being so respiratory as opposed to pulmonary, they were worried about, you know, absolutely don't let this kid catch it kind of thing. So we were so hunkered down. And I really just kind of started using social media a lot less and all of that stuff. And I love going on there and talking comics and promoting stuff and promoting books by other people and all that stuff too. But I've been talking a lot to my friends about moving to a newsletter format and just kind of moving away. Not even because it's so ugly. I just don't think it's so not conducive to conversations about the books, even with people you are totally on the same page with, regardless of how hard it is to have an argument or a debate about something on there. But I just think it reinforces the worst expectations that we all have, where it's like immediate gratification, immediate, it's like the algorithms that we use for everything, for Google, for Spotify, for that search, they want to give you what you already want. That's their design to do that and say, oh, you like that? Here's more of it with this. Oh, you like that? Here's more of it with this.
Yep.
Do you live here? Are you searching? Well, it's going to tell you, like, you're probably this type of person. So here's the likely results of your, likely endings to your search sentence. But
you get kind of like an echo chamber situation.
Yeah. And I think with Twitter, with, the comic discourse there, certain aspects of it, I feel like you just, like with stories, I mean, like that, like the fun is like, you might be angry at what they're doing with something or whatever it is, but if you can't wait a few months just to see, and see, especially if you're yelling about it before you even see the story, read the story, get in there, I mean, there are plenty of things I thought wouldn't work in the movies, on TV, in comics, where I'm like, that's crazy. That's never going to work. And then like Dan Slott, Superior Spider-Man, I'm like, no way, man. And then I loved it. It's one of my favorites. Just that, like, give it a shot, and give it time. Give it time. Like, how many shows do I love that like got better second season, third season?
Oh yeah. Yep. And plus some things just, you have, especially if it's something that's very different, you can have like an immediate negative reaction just because it's so not what you were expecting.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you let it settle, you start to see the upsides, and then as time goes on, you see how it fits into the larger picture and how it did have positive ramifications and ripple effects, and also some of the interesting things that are being said in the story itself. Sort of once you have a little more distance from that immediate reaction of, oh my God, what are they doing?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm telling you the truth, like, my least favorite, the thing I don't want is to pick up a Batman book and see something that's familiar to me that I've seen a million times. Mm-hmm. Some aspects of that, I like the illusion of comfort food, which I try to do a lot with my own stuff, where it's like, oh, look, it's all the stuff you like. Here it is. And then sneak in the stuff that's going to change all that as you go. But I really, especially at this age, I am excited for someone to come in and upset me. I want them to come in and do something I couldn't have thought of and change it and make right from an angle on that character that I haven't seen before and it might disturb me. As long as they love the character and they're doing something that they believe is pushing the character forward based on the values that character is built around, push it. Mm-hmm. They're elastic. They're not going to break. And if it'll come back. It'll be fixed. Like, so do something. Like, get out there. But as long as you're trying to say something, that's when I teach. That's the biggest. It's the hardest thing to kind of get through to young writers sometimes, or people coming in from other aspects of the industry or other industries altogether. Is that nobody wants you to come in. If they're inviting you in, DC or Marvel, they're not inviting you in to come in and tell a safe Batman story. They're inviting you in because they saw you had something to say. Now say it through these characters. That's my job, is to help you say, if I'm your teacher, how do we say exactly what you want to say, but use this mythology and this lexicon of characters in such a way that we're not being untrue to them, but we're still saying the thing you want to say, like we're getting at it. So is this about gun violence? Okay, you know what? Then I'm going to make the Red Hood gang a gang in 0 year that, because my kids, I told this story before, so you might have seen it if you've read interviews of mine, but my older son, when they did a lockdown drill at a school when he was very young, he was like 5 years old, he was at the water fountain and they didn't realize he was at the water fountain. And so he got caught in the hallway when they were doing like a shooter drill. And he was so terrified. He never went back to school without a thermos because he was afraid of getting caught in the hall again. So he'd never go to the bathroom or, get water there. He was always like peed before he went to school and came with a little bit of water that he would like. And I was just like, my kids have different fears. So I want Batman to make them brave in the face of that. So the Red Hood gang was designed around the idea that their whole purpose was to randomly pull people in, force them to attack at random in places you wouldn't expect at all, with no logic, on a private weird ideology where they're like violence, and some dark, cruel ideology of their own that's only apparent to them in some way. And that was saying, I want gun violence in my story, but represented in a way that makes sense. I'm not going to, I can't just do shooters and Batman because I can't, like they wouldn't be allowed. And B, it's not, there is a story, I'm sure, that should be told with Batman and that kind of a violence, but not the one I was. It wasn't the way I was doing it. So I thought that this was Greg Capullo Technicolor stuff. It was totally different. So it was about, how do I say what I want to say and approach the subject, but do it in a way where it's true to the tone of the book and what we're doing with Batman. So that's what I'm saying, is that come in and upset us, it's just understand as you come in, there always are ways for you to say what you want to say with these characters. And you just have to kind of find your language with it, meaning what villain is going to allow you to say what you want to say about him? What, okay, great. Is it Ivy? Is it Two-Face? Is it which one gets at the stuff you care about? What is it? Is it just a normal crime? Great. Do it. What is it? That. So I agree with you. I think it's patience. I just think everything works against patience and generosity and everything when it comes to so much nowadays with kids are exposed to, with everything just being always immediate, always reinforcing. It's rough.
You know what? If I were growing up in this age, I don't even know. I'd have like an anxiety disorder. I don't know. Well,
I've always had one, and I like my 9-year-old has one as well.
Anxiety disorder?
Yeah, I've always had, and I started medication for it when I was about 18, 17. So I've seen someone since that age. So the better part of my whole life, and I've been on a couple different medications, but I've been on the same one now, Lexapro, for a long time. And so there's no stigma in our house about it. And
no, I don't mean that at all.
No, I didn't take you to mean it.
No, okay.
No, I just mean to anyone listening, meaning
right.
I like talking about it because when I was a kid, it wasn't as talked about. And my kid, I just say, hey, it's totally, I go through it too. And someone, but I think social media and the stuff we're talking about just exacerbates it so much because you don't get a break. You can't, like, when I was a kid, it's like, at least you got home from school and you were relieved to just be away from all that. Wow. Now there's no, are they doing something without me? Oh, is someone saying something about me? Oh, did I say something wrong? You don't get a break. You're just always in that circuit.
Right. Yeah. And that's kind of what because it did come out wrong. And I feel really bad about that. But because I actually also had a lot of issues when I was a younger kid. But basically, I was just thinking, when I was growing up, I had enough trouble with the things going on in my school. If I had to worry about people bullying me on Twitter and, about gun violence, I definitely, it would have been even harder, basically, is what I'm trying to get at here.
It's not easy being a kid nowadays, and it's really weird. I'm so fascinated to see what the next generation of writers makes, because it's been such a wild, half decade where I feel like so many ugly things about us were just exposed in different ways. And then a lot of heroism too, a lot of great things as well. But, even the paper thin fragility of the system itself on so many levels, from on a political level to the infrastructure, and everything feels suddenly so fragile in different ways too. And I'm just really interested to see what young people write coming up. I want them to come in and make these characters their own and change the landscape a bit and say things that, speak to each other about what to do with things and yeah, all of it. I'm excited for that. I am.
Yeah, that's going to be really interesting. But I do wonder if the children of the and well, even the adults of the last year, who are having, they had to stay indoors for a year, and then they had crazy political things happening, violence in the streets. It's it's going to affect their voices as they age and become writers and become artists and creators. You're going to see the echoes of all these things in their work and in their thoughts and development.
I
And
know. I mean, my hope is with these characters. I'm excited for all kinds of like creator-owned work as well. I love
yeah.
the boom right now that's happening in creator-owned work. I think it's so exciting to see. But yeah, I want to take these 80-year-old characters and make them theirs and tell stories with them that are going to speak to the things that worry them in a new way that, are immediate and urgent, and resonant, all that stuff. So
that's a really great thing, I think, that James Tynion has been doing recently, kind of bringing in new characters and new energy, and also energizing some of the older characters. That's really.
He told me we talk every day. Like I spoke to him today already. He's away for a bit. He's so smart about that, where he's like, I want to make my Batman about new villains, new hope, new characters, new heroes, and I'm like, that's great, go for it. And you got Jorge, who I love from Justice League and got to meet a bunch of times. Love him, couldn't be a sweeter guy or handsomer. And then but I'm like, you got that energy. He's a young artist. He wants to do that. Go do it. And James is knocking it out of the park on all fronts.
Oh yeah. I've been blown away with every single issue that he's done. I'm actually kind of mad that it's monthly again. I have to wait now.
I know. He's relieved that he gets, it's not his fault.
I can imagine. Yeah.
That Joker, and he's writing, he's writing, when you're former, because he was my student back when he was in college. And then, and I was just an adjunct teacher. I was like my 20s. And so we've known each other a long time. We've known each other a good, 15 years now. But so he's like my little brother. But when, your former student becomes your favorite writer who you're learning from, like,
that's got to be so gratifying.
Best feeling. I'm just so proud of that guy and so enamored of his and dazzled by his skills. He's just terrific. And just a good person too. Great person.
Yeah.
I told my wife I would stay till about 10:15 in case the baby woke up. The baby has not woken up, but I feel like I'm stressing. I might be stressing everybody.
Okay.
Too late. But if you have if there are any other, I can answer, like if there are a couple things, anything you really wanted to ask, I can totally do it still.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the main thing that I didn't get to is, out of all the things that you've done, like, what's the book that you would like more people to discover? Something that you maybe think was overlooked, hasn't gotten as much attention as it should or could?
That's a great question. I mean, I've been really lucky with things that people have found. Most of the stuff, there are some things that flew more under the radar, like a book I did, Severed, that was a real historical horror book that I did when I first started over at Image. The Wake, After Death is one that this is from Jeff Lemire from that book, this picture here. I love that book, After Death. That was a real quiet one that we didn't really advertise. We just wanted to do it and make it together. If I had to pick one series, I think that I hope people find eventually, just because it's so everything that I ever wanted to write in one place. It's American Vampire, because
I know
that's my home base. It's been really hard getting to the end of it, just because it's the most effortless to write. It's got everything I love in it. It's like got the history, the action, the horror, the romance, like everything I love is in there. That it's just, I sit down with Rafa and it's like the easiest book in the world to write, because it's just, James talks about Something is Killing the Children's like that for him, where it's like, you have a book once in a while where it's just like effortless, where you're like, you still work on it. It's not like it's like the easiest, but out of the process of writing all your books, like that's the one where you're just like, oh, I love these characters. I love this. And
it's like coming home.
it is exactly like that. It is
Yeah.
exactly like that. And it's the first one I did too. So it's also special in that regard. And just the fans of that book, first, thank you, but also to know like we're ending it in terms of its current iteration in a couple months, where it finally kind of catches up to the present in the end. But Rafa and I always intend to come back to it and do stories. We've already talked about how we're going to do that in 2023 and other years, about returning to it to do little things and bigger things, but we just won't have it as a monthly anymore. Like we're not, we can't commit to it and be like, hey, we're going to do, 12 issues in a row or 30 issues in a row, or we're going to come back and instead of it building to the present, which is done, it will take place either in the like stories from the past, like Secret Files, but it will also have moments in the present where it's almost like I have a story in mind that I want to come back to it with, where it's like takes place in the present, where without giving away who lives and dies, characters who, fan favorite characters from the series are living in the present, discover a mystery that links to the past, and they're investigating it. So you flash back and see things from the past and history while you're still in 2021. So there's a lot to do with it still. So it's not like it's going away forever. It's just that we have so many things. We have another book we're doing together after it. So all this stuff that we just are really excited to do together and apart. And but American Vampire is like my real like baby. So.
And it's a great time to get into it because it's about to complete the primary run, but you still have things to look forward to in the future.
Yeah, I hope so. And it's a book that's very much it's always been about re-examining history, about how beholden we are in different ways to our worst impulses, to our best impulses, how both are, part of this like American DNA. And so for me, it's been a great book to write in this moment too, where the book is taking place in 1976 at this moment, but 1976 has a lot of weird parallels. The 70s have a lot of weird parallels to the last decade, as well as moments of real fracture and anxiety and having to reckon with racial injustice and all kinds of things. So I feel like, and there was an anger and a sense of decline, and a sense of are we ever going to make it back from starting to fall down a slope that is way more acute in different ways now than it was then. But as a historical moment, there's really interesting parallels. So it's been a great era to write about now.
So it can be relevant while still being a period piece, basically.
Yeah, it's like on the one hand, it's like driving Rockefeller's car through a mine tunnel with guns and crazy vampires and werewolves and that, and yet it's also about what makes us heroes and villains both as a country. So I enjoy that book a lot.
Okay, so I will not take up any more of your time.
Thank you. Pleasure. I could do this for a long time. I wish. Yeah, I'm. Let's do it again. It was super fun.
I would love to.
I really appreciate what you do, both for Comic Watch and Capes and everything. So thank you for being passionate about the art form and about creators and all of it. So
thank you for being awesome. I don't know.
Great. All right. Well, we'll talk soon then.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right. Bye.